Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a new weekly podcast shining a spotlight on Australian fiction. My name is Claudine Tinellis. As a writer and avid reader, I love chatting about books. And in this podcast, I'll chat to authors, publishers and readers, giving you, dear listener, insight into what's hot on the Australian fiction scene. So if you're looking for your next book recommendation or just want to know more about Aussie fiction writers, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and enjoy. Regular listeners will probably already know that I'm frequently starstruck, regularly awed by the talented authors I'm blessed to be interviewing for this podcast, completely inspired by the unique and spellbinding stories that Australian authors are creating at the moment. So you'll understand that the opportunity to chat with my next guest had me marvelling once again. Firstly, at my luck, and secondly, by the phenomenon that has become Trent Dalton. His debut novel, Boy Swallows Universe, published in 2018, has now sold more than 500,000 copies in Australia. In 2019, it was longlisted for the Miles Franklin Award, and in the same year, cleaned up at the Australian Book Industry Awards with 4 major awards, plus a New South Wales Premier's Literary Award, amongst many others. 2 years after the publication of Boy Swallows Universe, Trent is still riding the crest of his well-deserved tidal wave success, releasing his much-anticipated second novel, All Our Shimmering Skies, to critical acclaim. And so it gives me great pleasure to welcome Trent to the podcast today. Hi, Trent.
Hey, Claudine. Thank you so much for having me and for that beautiful intro. You really get me excited when I look back on I think back on the 2 years you described there. It's been a wild ride, and it is a wave, and I'm on that crest, and it's pretty nice. It's really nice.
Oh, that's wonderful. I was so fortunate to have met you very briefly last year at the Sydney Writers' Festival, as I mentioned just before we started recording. An event you might recall was marred when a fire alarm forced an evacuation of the entire venue.
Oh, it stands as quite possibly the best event I've done in the past 2 years, because you're exactly right. My dear friend Matt Condon and I, we were in full flow. Like Matt and I have done. Matt's a fellow journo and a fellow author. He's done about 10 novels. Matt. He was asking some of the most amazing questions. I have a lot of fun with that man up on stage, and we're really going, right? I think we were in probably 20 minutes, and then it was like full fire evacuation. And there might have been maybe 600 people in that auditorium. I think it was a pretty big event, that one. And the most amazing thing, Claudine, I thought, was that we all went out onto that sort of, sunny sort of pavement area, or sort of a quadrangle or something. I don't know what it was. And I just thought, Matt and I were just going, all right, well, that was that. No one's going to come back in. And somehow the Sydney Writers' Festival people just wove some magic, and we all got to go back in, and they pushed it all back. They pushed some events back, and they kind of put it out to people, hey, if you want to come back, we'll do it. And Matt and I were like, well, we're in, but are the audience in? And they came back, and I was so touched. It was just beautiful. It was the most amazing, and it turned into the most amazing session because it was so celebratory, and we had so much opportunity for it to fall by the wayside, and I couldn't believe it. And the audience was so wonderful, and that's Australian novel readers right there, isn't it, Claudine?
Totally.
They are so supportive, and they're just like, hey, mate, we want to hear more of those stories. And there's some wild stories behind Boy Swallows Universe. And funny thing about that one, though, it was such kind of chaos. By the time it was such a great event. By the time I then came out, I was buzzing, Claudine. And I don't know whether you saw this, but I went out with Matt, and we walked out into that big sort of signing area. This massive hall filled with people lining up at several author tables, right? And I saw this massive line. It must have been 90 people strong. And I was so buzzing because people had come back, and I was so grateful that I just immediately started hugging people in this line, right? And I was just wrapping my arms around them. And, you could not do this in, 2020. But in 2019, hugs were still on in a very big way. And I was just embracing these people, just going, thank you for coming back in. It meant the world to me. And thank you for reading my book. And I might have hugged about 10 people by the time my lovely friend Matt Condon leaned over into my ear and said, Trent, that's not actually your lineup for the signing table. That's the lineup to the ladies' toilets. So
hilarious.
That was, yeah, right. Like that was how much I was buzzing that day because of that moment, So yeah. Oh, look, I mean, my whole life is about second chances. Don't even get me started. So that was one great second chance when everyone came back in to tell some stories. You know what I mean? Like my whole life is based around that, taking your opportunities when they come, and things that might have fallen by the wayside, reclaiming them and making something from nothing. And, that all of that speaks to me. So you can imagine how buzzing I was by the time I saw your wonderful face, in the signing table, and you said some beautiful things, and it meant the world to me. So anyway, thanks for coming along.
Oh, no. Well, my friend and I, another Australian author, Sandy Docker, we were very fortunate to be recipients of your lovely hugs that day as well. So we'll take whatever we can get.
So really, like, what did I do? Like, you must have been like, oh, that's probably not necessary. I'm okay. I'm just like, okay, well, I'm glad you took one. It's, you know what it is? It is this weird thing. It's nervousness. It's nervous energy for one thing, is, to be honest, in truth. Like I'm actually at heart a bit of a, I'm actually I've got a reclusive kind of soul. Like, I don't naturally go talk in front of 600 people, despite what you see on stage where I'm like, hey, but it's this nervous energy that comes over me, and I turn into this sort of egomaniacal monster on stage. And it's sort of, so I sort of, and that just follows through for the next 3 hours. It really does. There's this energy pulsing through me. And so that's what that is. And when someone says, hey, this book spoke to me or something, it's like I can't just fist bump them. You know what I mean? I can't just go, oh, well, thank you. Well, it's like you're talking about my heart and soul. You're talking about my family. When you say those characters spoke to you, or anyone says anything kind about it, well, I have to then give them a hug. I must do that, because you're accepting the people that I was worried about writing about, because I was worried people might say some unkind things about, the darker aspects of that book. But in fact, everyone only has said kind things, and it means the absolute world to me. Hence that hug, Claudine. So,
bless. Yeah. Well, I guess that leads me to my next question. And it is, at the time that I met you, I just read Boy Swallows Universe, and I was struck by the overwhelming level of enthusiasm in that room, not just for you, but for your story. And it's a scene that seems to have repeated itself right around the country. So I wanted to ask, do you still pinch yourself that this semi-autobiographical coming-of-age novel found such a receptive audience with Australian readers?
Yeah, I thought that book was too wild for a wider audience. I thought it was it was very ambitious, and a bit, some of the themes in it and some of the narrative little tricks I was trying to pull off were a little bit ambitious and probably beyond my skill set, and so I was very touched when people did embrace it. But I've come to realize the big theme of that book, which is love and hope. A kid growing up in Australia, doing it tough, boy or girl, only needs one thing, which is love, and if you've got a second thing, which is hope, then great. You know what I mean? Like, and I had that in spades, despite all of that, the darker stuff of that book, and drug dealing and prisons and people losing people and violence. I swear to God, I had more love than so many people. I just had love in spades, coming from my 3 older brothers and my mom and my old man, and even coming from criminals, like criminals in that book, and, who sort of cared for me as a kid. And, but here's the thing, I started to realize, in terms of the reception of that book, I actually realize now that world isn't that foreign to people. A lot of Australians didn't grow up with a drug dealer, and their mum didn't fall in love with a drug dealer, and that drug dealer didn't have a secret room beneath their house, and that's true in the Dalton boys' life, right? We found that secret room. But all the other stuff, right, isn't that unfamiliar to people, to Australians who would have been around in the 80s, or even in their teenage years, whether it was or adolescence in the 70s or 60s. What I'm talking about is the fringes of our cities. And I realize now, Claudine, like, so many of us began in the fringes. So many of us. It's just, that's life in Australia. We grow up in those suburbs. We all know that brown brick of the Housing Commission, brown brick. And we move in as our lives, hopefully, we get a bit more educated and we get a better job and we move in. But we all know those suburbs on the fringes. They're so familiar to us all. And I think that book, as much as it's wild and all the crazy story, and there's a love story at the heart of it, I do think it did just tap into telling a bit of our story of Australia in the suburbs. And I was really touched when people come up and said, mate, I grew up in Adelaide, but that world you paint of Brisbane is exactly my world in Adelaide. And I grew up in the western suburbs of Sydney, and that was absolutely my world. I grew up on the fringes of Melbourne, and that was my world, And I found that really moving, that people just maybe wanted to hear a bit more about their own kind of existence. And we all know what it's like to open up and drink some home brand milk, or have a, have your Wheat Bix, and there's so much of that, or drink a can of Pasito and dream about a chocolate billabong and have Australian Crawl on the radio. And, it's all that stuff I thought was probably one thing that tapped into people as well. And so it was sort of, those events became this kind of celebration of all that. And you'd be surprised how many of us have overcome a lot of stuff. And it's just that I sort of amped it up to a next level. And it's about half of that book is absolutely true, or maybe 60% even is full on hardcore truth. But, the rest of the 40% is storytelling. And so people were going, yeah, I feel it. It's just that you took it to the next level and gave a beginning, middle, and end, and a thrilling finale, and a sort of Hitchcockian finale. And that's great, but it's couched in an existence and a life that so many of us in Australia are deeply familiar with. And that's just living. If you were around in the 1980s, there's a lot for you to appreciate in that book. And I think that might be some of the secret to why people embraced it.
Indeed. Now, it would be difficult, I think, to imagine many readers in Australia who hadn't yet heard of your phenomenal success with Boy Swallows Universe, and the fact that it's in part based on your own childhood in suburban Brisbane. But for those, no doubt, waiting to read the new book, you really couldn't have written a more different setting. So I wanted to ask, what was the spark or the seed of inspiration for Molly Hook's story? Why bomb-ravaged Darwin? Why 1942?
Can I give you like a ridiculously long answer, Claudine?
Or
do you want
this
the
is your
sort of
interview?
You can have like the real true story, or you can have the kind of also true, the true and dark and deep story, or the true and sort of light and easy story. But I'll give you the dark and deep if you've got time.
Yes, please.
Well, the truth of it is, I'm a bowerbird journo who for quite some time has just collected 20 years of stories. Like my writing desk has like towers of story ideas, right? That I've always just either wanted to write. Initially, of course, just as my day job as a writer for the Weekend Oz magazine on the sort of on the newspaper. And so that really helps if you're sort of always just thinking about story ideas. And one of those sort of story ideas, and it's literally a piece of paper that I've had on my desk for about 15 years. And it's the story of this fallen Japanese fighter pilot named Sergeant Hajime Toyoshima, right? Bombing of Darwin, 1942, on the first bombing raid of Darwin on February 19. This pilot, Hajime, he gets shot down by the diggers on the Australian soil, these brave diggers who are down in Darwin, and with the anti-aircraft guns, and they clip this fighter pilot, and Sergeant Hajime Toyoshima crash lands on Melville Island, which is Australian soil, and as wild and magical as a landscape as you can possibly imagine. Hajime hits his forehead on the flight controls, wraps his head in a bandage, hops out of his aeroplane, out of his fighter plane, his Zero, and he has a pistol in his right hand, and he sets off wandering aimlessly through that Australian wilderness. Now, he comes across a group of 10 First Nations people, and one of whom, Matthias Ulungara, this incredibly brave man, comes up behind him with a tomahawk and captures him and takes him as a prisoner of war, becoming the first Australian to capture a Japanese soldier on Australian soil. An incredible story, right, Claudine? Like, I've always just felt like, man, that is something, right? So that's just in the back of my mind, right? Yeah. Now, in the 2 years that come after Boy Swallows Universe, I feel very unsettled. I'm kind of losing my mind a bit in joy, but also worry that I went too far in that book, or that I constantly worried that I hurt people, or that I might have, just terrified that I've kind of gone too far in mining my own experiences, which I had to do, right? I had to do that. I needed to get that out of my system. If I was ever going to write any more novels at all, I had to first write Boy Swallows Universe. But in order to do that, you're at risk of hurting people who don't necessarily want that story told, and that would be fully understandable. I'm talking about people like my beautiful brothers and my insanely heroic and warrior woman of a mum, Leonie. These people didn't ask for this kid who's a journo to start writing about their lives in the 1980s, even though it's not them, it's not about them, it's inspired by that world, but still, you know, they have to suffer every joker coming up and going, oh, how much of that was real and all that, right? And one of those people who never got to have his say was my beautiful, dear late father, Noel. And as the 2 years of that wild world, all the others I could send it to, and I go, guys, you need to let me know if there's a single sentence that you're not happy with in this, it's going in the bin. And they were so beautiful. You know, they were the first, each one of them who was still alive, just going, hey, Trent, it's bigger than us. It's beautiful. You got to get this thing out there. And I have never stopped thanking them in the 2 years since they've sent me those messages. But one guy I never got to find out was my dear dad, who lived for reading books, Claudine. He woke up each day. He was a rogue of a man, covered in tats and smoking drum cigarettes. And he'd spend all day just sleeping on this high jump mattress that he got doing community service at a local school near us in northern Brisbane. And he just woke up and he would just read some massive thriller or some wild African novel or some deep crime book or some beautiful epic by Hemingway or Steinbeck, or, you know, he just read it all. He's just prolific. And he's the guy who handed me books and handed my brother books and told us the value, the utter value of reading, and not just even reading. You know, this is a podcast, this wonderful podcast you do celebrating Australian books. Well, that guy loved Australian novels, and he loved an outback adventure, and he loved the land, and he loved its people, and he loved its characters, and he sort of filled me with that love as well. And I went and wrote this book, right, that bloke, he sort of died as I was tinkering with it in my head. That guy who lived for reading never got to see his youngest son's books on the shelves, you know, and among his heroes and stuff. And it's the great tragedy of Boy Swallows Universe, is that guy never got to read it. And it's twofold, because I never got to ask him what he thought of it, you know, and he was my biggest fan in the terms of like any journalistic piece I'd write on a Saturday morning. I'd just hang off a text from Dad who said, oh, you nailed that one, or you got that one right, or, you know, and it was just, I mean, it makes your heart sore and you feel like you can conquer the world if your old man's behind you. And, you know, and he was absolutely my sort of kind of spiritual kind of writing kind of insight hero, you know. As luck would have it, for my day job, Claudine, I got sent, just as Boy Swallows Universe was growing legs, I got sent to the Flinders Ranges in South Australia. I got dropped on the top of the Flinders Ranges, and I had to hike those ranges for a story. And then I went to Uluru. I slept under the stars in a swag at Uluru. Then I got sent to a place called Groot Island, which is on the edge of Arnhem Land in the NT. And then I got, and then a couple of weeks after that, I went to Litchfield National Park, which is a place I've been to 3 times in my adult life. And it's about an hour and a half south of Darwin. And I believe it's Australia's best kept natural landscape secret. And all along this way, Claudine, all throughout these places, I'd finish my day job and I'd take my notes or do my interviews and do my transcriptions. And I'd just knock off right about 5 o'clock as the sun's going down invariably over these beautiful places. And I'd have a beer in my hand. And whenever I'm by myself and I've got a beer is when I process my life. And I look at myself and I go, how am I going? Like, am I, like, literally the things Eli Bell's asking himself in that book, am I still a good man here? Have I been a dickhead today? Okay. Or is this stuff overwhelming me? And am I believing my own hype, or all sorts of stuff? I'm questioning myself. And I go quite deep when I think about that sort of stuff. And every time I'd do that, right, I'd look up to this beautiful shimmering sky across Australia that comes at sunset. It comes every morning, this miracle, this great thing that happens for us all, this great gift that happens twice a day, that sky shimmering for us. And I remember I would look up and I'd just raise a beer to the sky. I know it sounds a bit cheesy, and just in my head, I'd just go, hey, Dad, can you see this? And you know, can you believe this? What happened? You know, I wrote about our 1980s and people seem to care about it, Dad. And they care about you. They're telling me how much they love you as the character Robert Bell in that book, Dad. And they love that guy and they think he's funny and beautiful. And they know he's got his demons, but they're so proud of the way he overcomes them and how he, oh man, I'm going to cry, Claudine, if I keep going. But I'll tell you, then, and I just say, thank you, you know, thank you for making it happen, Dad. You know, like, I just want you to know I'm so appreciative, because I got to say that to Mum and my brothers, but I don't get to say that to him. So I have to just say it to the sky. But here's the thing. Of course, the sky doesn't say anything back, but it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to, because the feeling of just me talking up there and looking up and sincerely, actively saying something, even though it's in my head, it feels so good, Claudine. And then it got me thinking about all of the private conversations we have with the sky, and all of us have these private whispers, and we all say deep and beautiful things, and we don't say anything trivial, and we say things like, are you up there? Can you hear me? I love you. Or we say some things of desperation like, why me? Can you help me? Are you listening? And,
Yeah.
it's deep stuff that we reserve for that sky if we do talk to it, right? And I know not everyone does, but I'm telling you, the people that do, and I've already spoken to so many, have already read that book, All Our Shimmering Skies, and they go, thank you for reminding me of my friendship with the sky. And anyway, I thought of this story about, okay, I wanted this hero, Molly Hook, right? And she's this 12-year-old girl, and she's raised on a graveyard in Darwin. And what if her life is so hard that her only friend is, well, she's got two friends. One is the shovel that she has to dig graves with, and she calls that shovel Bert. And the second friend is the sky. And she talks to the sky, and the sky guides her way. And what if the sky in turn is so appreciative of her friendship that it starts to drop gifts for her? And the first sky gift that it drops for her is a map. And the second sky gift is a friend. And the third sky gift is a miracle. And the fourth sky gift is the end of her story. And that sort of mantra just kind of came to me. And that was the genesis of this story about this girl, Molly, who believes she's cursed. And as the bombs drop over Darwin in 1942, she goes on this wild adventure through that insanely beautiful Northern Territory wilderness to find the man that she has convinced herself might remove her curse. And along the way, these gifts fall from the sky to help her on her quest. And of course, the friend that falls from the sky, this second gift, is this fallen Japanese fighter pilot named Yukio, absolutely inspired by the dropping of Hajime Toyoshima onto Australian soil. And so all of these things coalesced into this wild adventure, Claudine. But it's, in truth, it's the story that I had to write to escape from myself. I had to run away from 1980s Brisbane, and I ran all the way to Darwin. And here's the funny thing: I ran into that Darwin wilderness, and I actually found Eli Bell again. And that's the wild thing. It's like, you think you can run from yourself, or you can run from your past, but the past always stays with you, and it will never run from you, because it is you. That's why every theme of that book always talks about cycles and legacy and inheritance and what we do with trauma, and the same things I'm investigating in Boyce Weller's universe. Apologies for that really long answer. It is a long answer because it's a long gestation, and I have to go with those spine tingling feelings. I go, oh, that's powerful. And then that's where the story comes, So
I suspect, as you've probably heard from a lot of other people that you're speaking to now, you're not the only one that speaks to the sky. And a lot of people are looking for answers and, can't get them from traditional sources, obviously.
Well, that's it, right? I mean, it's like, where do we put our faith? And it's a version of my faith, I guess. I'm just putting faith in my love of my old man. I'm not a particularly religious or spiritual man, but well, I guess I am, in many ways. I'm filled with faith, and I'm filled with belief in the cyclical nature of life, and that, oh man, I mean, the whole book's filled with this theme of finding your spirituality where you can get it, and finding your meaning where you can get it, and hence why in Boyce Weller's universe, Eli's constantly looking at birds, and he's looking at little riddles, or he's thinking of little things in his head that could well be just total fantasies in his mind, little token lines, refrains that he keeps telling himself. Your end is a dead blue wren. Well, that's just him myth building, and he's kind of finding his own religion, in his own making, in his own mind. And that's something I do. And so it's like me talking to the sky. I know Dad's not up there, but isn't it beautiful to talk to him still? And so that's an act of faith in itself. And I love that we all do that. Oh man, I mean, life's a wild, troubling, beautiful, wondrous thing. And we all have to find our ways to get through it. And I've been loving of late in the past 2 years to have those gentle little moments just between my old man and I, and that's helped me no end, and I know for certain that we're all finding those little moments across Australia.
Absolutely. That is a beautiful story indeed. Now, the thing that struck me that Eli Bell and Molly Hook seem to have in common is an experience of trauma, but ultimately hopeful characters. They're made of particularly strong stuff despite the very difficult circumstances they often find themselves in. So I wanted to know that as their creator, do you find that keeping them hopeful is a difficult line to walk given everything they've experienced?
Yeah, Molly began in the most beautiful, hopeful, optimistic way. My youngest daughter comes home from school, and a teacher had been reading Boy Swallows Universe, and the teacher had said, I love the books, and I love this story. It's pretty wild, and my youngest daughter has to then comprehend the fact that suddenly a teacher knows all about her grandma's kind of very interesting period in the 1980s, and that's an
Yeah.
interesting thing for her to hear. And she comes back, and I'd already told her the whole lot of that background anyway, but she suddenly was fascinated with this book, Boy Swallows Universe, and I told her more about the story, and then she's like, Dad, so you wrote a book about two beautiful boys, Eli and Gus Bell. Gus being Eli's older brother, and a sort of an amalgam of my beautiful three older brothers. But she said, Dad, you're a father of two girls. And I am, right? I'm a father of two girls, 11 and 13. And she's like, why don't you write a book about two beautiful girls? And I was like, she was challenging me. What she's saying in that question is, you're meant to inspire me, buddy. That's like, what's your role? What am I here for? It's not to, okay, maybe it's to process my stuff, but moreover, what's more important is to inspire my two daughters. And I thought, brilliant question, Sil. I'm going to sort of have to do this. It's no coincidence that Molly Hook is smack bang age between both of those girls, 12 years of age. But why then throw so many obstacles at this poor kid, right? In the narrative, and she has to go through hell to get her answers and to get to the end of her story. But that's just a reflection of this thing that I truly believe, Claudine, which is the importance of reminding Aussie kids who I see, and I've written about them for 20 years. There's so many, I'm talking thousands of Australian kids. They will go home from school today at 3 p.m. and they will walk into homes filled with violence and neglect and poverty, and they are on the knife edge as we speak. And they might be 14 or 15 and deciding where the hell they're going to take their lives. And I feel deep down subconsciously I write these books for those people. I know I'm writing it for myself at 12. I know I'm writing them for 12-year-old Trent Dalton in many ways, because this is the book I wrote all our Shimmering Skies as a kind of book that I would have read in whatever madness might have been going on beyond our hallway. I escaped through books like this one, and I wanted to write one for some kids in 2020 who might be doing it tough, and I know that sounds, again, so cheesy, or I'm not trying to be honorable or anything. It's just sort of, I just think subconsciously when I analyze it, I think I am doing that because I want those kids who are on the knife edge of having life bash the magic out of them. I want to remind them that there is a fire inside them permanently, and only you can put it out. Don't let any other mofo put it out on you. And I just think that's a really strong theme in this book. It's like so many people, the adults in Molly Hook's life, and particularly her uncle, who is the manifestation of hate, the very embodiment of hate, to the point where he hates so much that his hate might even sort of sustain him through death even. And he's a machine of hate. And I just love that this girl just will not succumb. And I'm so proud of those Aussie kids who don't succumb. And I understand when anyone succumbs too, and don't get me wrong, I never say a word about anyone who succumbs to the darkness, but I tell you, if I'm here to write anything, I think it's to write from the perspective of that boy I once was, and there's a lot of emotion in that kid, and I do actually love that kid so much. I have such a fondness for that kid that I once was, more so than I have a fondness for the 41-year-old dad that he became, who's so much more complex and weird. But I love that kid at 12 to about 18 that I once was, because he was in the thick of it, and I had some beautiful guidance from some incredible people who made me laugh in the face of the darkness, and who sort of laughed at my tears and said, come on, man, it's going to be all right. And, and all of that stuff. And I love that notion that there's some Aussie kid out there tonight probably doing that, and that kid's probably got some older brother as well who's helping them get through it. That's magic stuff. There's such strength and resilience and such storytelling in that, and such power. And if I can access those emotions, which are still in me, Claudine, like they don't
Yeah.
go anywhere. Just because I write a book, 400-page book in Boy Swallows Universe, those emotions never go. I'm gone there. I'm there now. I've got a chill down my spine as I talk to you because I just know what that felt like. And I think I've been put on this earth to write from that place. And so like I say, it's like, yeah, it's this wild adventure, this book that I've wrapped up in colors and of landscapes and native plants and creatures and animals and magic and sorcery and all sorts of wild stuff. But it's really just me speaking to that 12-year-old boy that I once was, and that's a really special interaction that I hope to share with readers.
In as much as Boy Swallows Universe is an ode to Australian suburbia, All Our Shimmering Skies, as you've just mentioned, is set on a much larger stage in Australia's top end, where Australia's harshest and perhaps most interesting landscape is on show. So tell me about your experience of writing about this landscape. What research did you have to do? Who did you speak to? Where did you go?
Yeah, great question. The real key thing I did, so I had that structure, right? That sort of bone structure of the 4 gifts that really become the 4 parts of the story. And I knew I wanted it to be in the NT, obviously because of the Hajime Toyoshima story and Darwin. And that's just for me, the most dramatic moment in modern Australian history. But also I knew that landscape quite well because Darwin was the first place I flew to when I was 20 years of age. And my brother was in the army and he lived up there for a while and I'd go up there to see him. But then I just went back and forth all the time for various stories for magazines and stuff. And I went to Litchfield National Park 3 times and it's magical. It is genuinely like there's a lost city of stone there. They call it the Lost City, where it's sort of stone structures that look to me, if you're vaguely imaginative like I sort of was growing up and look at landscape and look at objects and physical things that you pass by and can just turn them into things in your mind, just the way a kid will turn a cloud, a cumulus cloud or whatever, cumulonimbus fluffy, whatever the fluffy cloud is. They turn that into an elephant or they turn that into a knight on horseback, or you can turn it into whatever you want. Well, I did the same thing when I walked through Litchfield National Park, that you can kind of look at a rock structure and see someone you're terrified of, or some man that you were afraid of when you were in your teens, or frozen in stone, and that's powerful stuff. Or you can walk along a cliff top, a cliff edge in the NT and feel as though you're at the end of North by Northwest, or it's you can put yourself into these places. And I'm walking through Litchfield National Park just going, well, this is storytelling heaven. This is I just need to set a book here. And I knew that was the case for quite some time. And I knew Molly was going to walk into a place like Litchfield National Park. Okay, well, what does a journo do next? You get on Google and you type in Litchfield National Park, and I need to go back there, but I want to go back there with someone who knows the place. And who better than this woman I found on the internet named Tess Addy, whose ancestral connection to Litchfield National Park stretches back thousands of years. And she runs Northern Territory Indigenous tours that go right through Litchfield National Park. And I literally just phoned Tess up. This woman is wondrous, right? She is so cool, Tess Addy. And I just said, Tess, you don't know me. My name's Trent Dalton. I wrote a book called Boy Swallows Universe, and it did okay. And I'm being allowed to write another one. And the one I want to write is this story of Molly. I sort of gave the very loose structure of that book. And I said, she's cursed. And as the bombs drop over Darwin, she runs into this vine forest country. And I think she runs I'm saying this to Tess, I think she runs into a place like Litchfield National Park. But I sort of want to walk through it again and really take notes and just document every last facet of it. And I'm wondering if you'd do me the honor of walking through there with me. And she was kind of on her off season. Like it was sort of like she'd been working really hard, and she's like, it was a real pain in the backside for her, I think. And she's just like, but I just think she liked the bones of the story. Yeah. I think she kind of just said, all right, come on up and I'll show you where she goes. And it was sort of like this beautiful, generous thing where she just goes, all right, here's this dumb white guy from Brisbane. I might be able to show him some magic of the place, my backyard. And it was the greatest honor. And that trip. And so I went up with Tess and her partner, Greg, and Greg's incredibly knowledgeable about Darwin history as well. So it was sort of this beautiful thing where Tess was coming at me with all the magic and all the wonder of the way you can look at something and go, well, okay, you see a paperbark tree, but But, Tess sees a pillow or something she can turn in, and she can rip the bark off and turn it into a pillow. Just little things like that. I'm just note taking all of that stuff. And, I just do this gushing acknowledgement to Tess in the back of the book, because she lit me up. She lit me up. She set the whole place on fire for me. And there's all these riddles. So the first map that drops, the first gift is a map that drops for Molly Hook, and it's her grandfather's gold pan, essentially. And on the back of this pan, she finds a map, and essentially, and a map. It's a map for her to find her answers, and she thinks it's a map to find Longcoat Bob, but it's essentially a treasure map. And on the back of that map are all these riddles, and some of those answers to those riddles were things that I saw walking through Litchfield National Park. And so then I have the answer to the riddle, and I reverse engineer a riddle from it in my imagination. But it's all from just going there and seeing the place, just like we all should, I mean, we all know those places, and it's all in our DNA. So if you read that book, you will know it's Litchfield National Park, but it's not. It's sort of this version of it. It's kind of, I wanted to turn it into Oz. I wanted to make it feel as though it's Dorothy walking from black and white Kansas and stepping into Oz, Technicolor Oz. And it has that Technicolor element to it, which is full magic, because that's how I see it. It did come alive for me that day. It was monsoonal. It was the time when it was wet season, when Darwin comes alive. They call it the build-up, and then that turns into this thing where just the whole place just comes alive. Just the same way my hometown, Brisbane, comes alive in this kind of spring. It's like we get the jacarandas, but mate, the wet season in Darwin is just, everyone must see it. Like, call up Tess Addy now and book it to her. I'm not trying to, I swear to God, I didn't make some deal with her or anything where I just said I'd plug her stuff. I mean, you do that, right? Then you're actually doing the whole history of Australia a favor. The whole book is about owning our past and owning our place and owning our wonders as well as the dark parts. And so you go do something like that with Tess, you just see everything from the perspective of anyone who has a connection to that 60,000 year Indigenous history of our country. And I just think it's just a simple, wonderful and honouring thing that we can do, is go walk through this land with someone like Tess.
It certainly coloured Molly's world and really gave definition and shape to the experiences that she was having. And I think that in this current environment, such evocative armchair travel just might be the impetus people need to explore our own backyard, right?
Oh, Claudine, I couldn't believe it. I could not. And I kept saying to the publishers, we had some hard times about when we were going to release this book. And a lot of people were like going, Trent, can't wait. They were sending me like direct messages on social media and stuff, Claudine, saying, Trent, I can't tell you how tough this has been, but your book coming out is going to be such a salve. It's going to be such a tonic for us. But I swear to God, I didn't intend that. I was just doing it for me. I was escaping myself, like from the kind of prison. That prison is probably, I'm talking the four walls in my head of my own past, right? Like, it's like I was making that escape, never once thinking that come spring 2020, that might be an escape for literal four walls, where people, our beloved friends in Melbourne, who have just, mate, that whole story is about grace and poetry. The grace and poetry that the citizens of Melbourne have shown in 2020 are beyond my comprehension. I mean, I was in lockdown up here in Brisbane, like a lot of people, for about 6 weeks, and I lost my mind. It was so hard, Claudine, and those amazing people have been doing the schooling from home and working from home and locked inside their homes for month upon month upon month, and their resilience staggers me. And I know we're seeing the after effects of some of the mental health aspects of that. We cannot underestimate it, but I just love that into that world might come a book like this, where look, just get away from your armchair, as you say. Like, such a beautiful way to do it, armchair travel, like you can. And it's hard. It's not easy sometimes to get to Darwin anyway in the first place. So it's so great that hopefully I can take them during this pandemic that is so brutal for us all, just take them away for a bit, maybe for a couple of hours during their day, and just get to that shimmering sky over Darwin and go see a praying mantis on a native plant, or go see a crocodile, go see water buffalo, go see dingoes, go see
Yeah.
it all, and that's the power of storytelling, isn't it? I mean, that's why we tell stories. We tell stories because we always want to escape. We forget that sometimes. Like, I have this big thing I riff upon, which is about the idea that, it's so funny. We spend so long in IKEA and we spend so much money on Danish furniture or whatever, this new lovely furniture. But it's, we forget the whole meaning of a table. A dining table is just a place. It's just a campfire. It's just a place where we come together to tell more stories. And that's really important. Haven't we all come together more than ever? And like what you're doing, this is a campfire, Claudine. You and I are sitting around a campfire telling stories, and I think it's really beautiful. And that's what Zoom has been for everyone in 2020. It's like, strip it all back. All we want around us is our family members and the ones we love and the ability to tell more stories together. And that's honestly the fundamental thing about being human that separates us from, anyone else in the universe. We can tell you what happens when Jack and Jill go up the hill. That's an amazing invention that we came up with as humans. And I love that we're indulging in it more than ever through this. We're battling back against the pandemic through our own ability to tell stories. And I think that's so cool.
Amen to that. Absolutely. Now, I understand that you've sold the film rights to Boy Swallows Universe. So I wanted to ask you to tell me about that. Do you intend to be involved?
Yeah.
Or when might we see that production come to fruition?
Oh, Claudine, it's genuinely my favorite topic. And I'm so glad you went there. I swear to God, I'm such a film nerd. And it's like something I'm absolutely thrilled by. And you got to understand all that mad stuff in the 1980s and early 1990s for the Dalton boys. Well, let me tell you, we were escaping through, not just through books, but absolutely through the Wonder Years and Degrassi Junior High and Family Ties and Back to the Future and Steven Spielberg and, you name it, like it was just, we were in it and we were in there wholesale, like full scale, full tilt. We were in it. And so to think that now my little story about Brackenridge, Brisbane, Queensland, Australia, or Darra, Brisbane, Queensland, we're talking pretty obscure, specific places, are going to perhaps be shown on Hollywood screens or put on some sort of Netflix style platform or Stan or Foxtel or one of these sort of amazing things. They're turning that book into potentially 8-part. It was going to be 6, but it's so rich. Thankfully, they're turning it into 8-part series of amazing creatives coming together, including the wondrous Joel Edgerton, who might be the most charismatic human being I've ever met in my life. They're taking it and turning it into something truly epic and something, well, over COVID, the amazing screenwriter of it, John Colley, who wrote Master and Commander, an amazing Australian screenwriter who's seen it all, and done it all. He has written, Claudine, I've read the scripts and the scripts are wondrous. There is a tone to these scripts that you would not believe, that is something I've never personally seen on screen, and they are swinging for the fence in the same way that I tried to swing for the fence in the writing of it. Just feel like there's an approach to it where it's like, let rip, don't hold back and just give the audience everything you can and every part of you, heart and soul, because you might only get one shot at it. That's how I approach the writing of that book. All right, someone said that I'm going to get published. I am going to throw the whole kitchen sink into this, so that's how it feels. And it's beautiful. And they're amping up characters that I love, like Caitlin Spies. My favorite character in that book is probably Caitlin Spies, and she's this warrior journo sort of badass who kind of is the hero of the story in the end, and she does all the heroic things in that book. And she's inspired by my wife, that character. So imagine my joy when I see that John Colley has taken her and kind of put her right up front. Like, one episode opens with her in the most amazing scene standing on the edges of the Brisbane River, and you're just going, oh man, that's iconic, and it's just like, I love that. He's made my wife iconic, and it's just like, it's like, dude, you could not have done a cooler thing. And so my wife and I have read, we read these scripts and smile, and we laugh, and we just go, this is truly surreal. And so in terms of my involvement, I'm executive producer. I held back because I didn't want to dive back into that world. I was a bit reticent at the time. And the funny thing about All Our Shimmering Skies is, in the writing of All Our Shimmering Skies has made me okay with going back into that world. And I feel like that's the world I should be writing about.
Mm.
And it's the world I know. So it's the world I will write about again, most definitely. But I was really reticent to even write scripts and sort of help out with script and stuff, because I was like, look, I told that story, and I feel for me, it couldn't have gotten any better. The way it was received and how people got into it, it was like, that's that. I'm done with that. But I'm so grateful when, this guy, Joel Edgerton, who could be talking to Spielberg and has, he could be emailing Spielberg, and he's emailing little Trent Dalton in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. And he's going, hey, just checking you're okay with that script. I think it's amazing. Do you think it's okay? And I'm like, mate, it's unbelievable. and it's like, all of my enthusiasm and stuff, I'm just doing exclamation mark after exclamation mark, just going, this is unbelievable, capital letters. I'm just this gushing buffoon, but I have to tell them, it's just like, I'm for real. It is incredible. So I can't wait for people to see it. And if all goes well in this sort of strange times we're in, we might start to see some actual working on that, like actual physical sort of doing some stuff, next year. So it should be really exciting, Claudine. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Stuff of dreams, Trent.
Oh, it is. It genuinely is. I mean, don't even get me started. So there's some kid maybe in Brackenridge right now, who can see themselves on screen and see their world on screen. That's deeply profound, and they will. There's some kid who might not be reading a book, or what if there's some kid who can't even read, right? They can watch that television show and they can see their world in it, and they will see the great secret that anyone who reads the book. And the great secret is it gets good, right? There is a light and it never goes out. And that is the great secret that is there on offer for some 14-year-old kid in Housing Commission Australia to sort of go, oh yeah, right. Thanks for the reminder. And that's the greatest thing that has come out of that book. All these letters I've gotten from people going, thank you for reminding me that there is a light at the end of this tunnel, and I just have to be patient and wait till I turn 18 and I can escape.
Trent, you mentioned that you had to write this new book, All Our Shimmering Skies, in order to find your way back to Eli Bell.
Yeah.
So does that mean that you're writing a sequel?
I'm thinking of the bone structure of it, let me tell you. And I'm really excited about what could happen with it. One question that always comes up, and it's come up frequently in the past 2 years, was what happened to August Bell? Yeah. And that's a really deep question, because in the book, Eli meets the love of his life, and that's exactly what happened to me in real life. I met the love of my life, so 0 to 20 was a little bit wild, but 20 to 40, well, that was pretty cool. And it was just, I became a father, and life got pretty good. But I would love to know whether things were that simple for August Bell. And I'm not just talking about like whatever. I wouldn't write about what happened to my brothers or anything like that. I just think using August Bell as a very rich and interesting character, and go, what happens to a kid like that, in a story like that. And I thought that's really cool. But also there's this really great link between August Bell and Frankie Bell, his mum. So exploring Frankie Bell's past while at the same time exploring August Bell's future, I thought could be something really cool. And I was so against the idea of a Boy Swallows universe sequel. Like, I was just like, oh, that would be the most cheesy, sort of ridiculous thing to do. But enough people told me, like, hey, I'm really interested. And even following up on characters like Darren Dang, who were periphery characters, but he's one of my favorite characters in the book, this wild Vietnamese boy who Eli loves, and what happens to him. But even for Eli as well, that notion that, you think you can be done with the rocks of your past, but the past won't be done with your rocks, And so I think there's some rich fodder in there. So not necessarily my next book, but maybe my fourth, I'm thinking, could be really cool, and just give it a bit of breathing space and revisit. I mean, it's still very bare bones, but it's like, I'm pretty excited now. And it's so weird. I was so against the idea, but yeah, I really mean it. Having All Our Shimmering Skies gave me the passcode that opened up a treasure chest full of stories, in all truth, Claudine. And I'm so grateful for Molly Hook for that. I had to go in the past and find this girl who unlocked this box of stories for me. And she makes me believe that anything is possible. And I feel like I'm just at the start of, I feel like how I felt when I was at the start of my journalism career, to be honest. Like, I just feel like back then I was about 20. I wanted to write every last human story across Australia. And now I want to write that in novel form. I feel the same way.
Fantastic. Well, I guess it's a watch this space then.
Yeah, definitely watch that space. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. So, Trent, as I mentioned earlier when we were talking off air, I have a lot of writers who listen to this podcast. And so I wondered if you had any tips for people who are looking to write their first novel or to seek publication for something they've written.
I mean, I'll just tell you the truth of the things I've learned in the past 2 years. Here's some truths. Don't ever believe that your voice isn't as valid upon a bookshelf as Tim Winton's or Richard Flanagan's or Geraldine Brooks's. I say those three, meaning they're my absolute heroes. It's very intimidating when you see that kind of caliber of a writer, and you see that, okay, that's what works. That can be so stifling if you get hooked up in thinking, oh, my book has to be as good as Year of Wonders, or it has to be as good as People of the Book. You could just find you'd never get anything done, so don't for a second believe your story has to be as good as Dirt Music or as good as Narrow Road to the Deep North. Don't for a second think it has to be. It just all you have to do is put black ink on white abyss paper, and it's better than what was there before. Like the one word is better than what was there before, because nothing comes from nothing. And don't think that your voice isn't just as valid, though, because your story is your story and your voice is yours, and it's completely different to the 6 billion other voices that are out there in the world. And I love that notion, so it doesn't matter as long as you find your voice. But the first thing I think is be enthusiastic. Enthusiasm is my real big, I should have it tattooed on my shoulder blade, that word, but it's like, just be enthusiastic. When you're talking to Claudine on the podcast, try, be enthusiastic, because you'll get so much more out of it, and just sort of enjoy it. And, but I think that's the way you approach looking at a bird in the sky, a book in your hand, a beer in your hand, a spaghetti bolognese you're about to make, everything. Just be enthusiastic about it, because, man, you're so bloody lucky to be alive, and the world is an incredible place. And if you approach your writing in that way, with enthusiasm, like, I mean, physical enthusiasm, go there with strength and just bash those words out. And here's the other big thing I've learned for me, is that I have to write with my heart and not with my head. So don't trust anything that's coming from that head. Just get that first muscle draft, prize that out of your heart, and let your heart write those words, and then bring that untrustworthy betrayer thing called your brain, bring that in only on the edit, because it's the thing that's going to bring you down and rag you and question yourself and bring all your self-doubt. But don't let all of that stuff enter until you've got that first draft done and you've hit full stop and you've got something complete. Just finish and take your story to the end, because so many novels out there are half written. Just get to the end and finish it, and then work backwards and go. And then if you don't think it's good, make it good. And so write with your heart and edit with your head. That's another real big one. But ultimately, be enthusiastic about your writing, your kids, your wife, and your life.
I love it. Thank you so much for that. Trent, I wanted to say congratulations on the publication of yet another beautiful book in All Our Shimmering Skies. Aww. It's a wonderful story of courage and hope that I thoroughly enjoyed. I wish you every success with it, Trent. Thank you so much for joining me on Talking Aussie Books.
Oh, thank you, Claudine. And that's so beautiful. You light me up. You really do. And thank you for supporting Australian books. I think it's beautiful what you do and what you've done for so long now. And I just think it's so cool. We're all honoured every time you talk about another Aussie book. So bravo to you, and thanks for having me on.
Well, that's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes or drop me a line via my Instagram at Claudine Tinellis or on my webpage, claudinetинellis.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, happy reading.